I needed a goal to write that was attainable. It was specific. Okay, by the end of this week, I'm going to have this chapter written. By the end of this month, I'm going to have this portion of the book completed. Slowly over time, I started to build a map, really. It became this diagram, this map of the book that had timelines on it, focused on spending at least 30, 45 minutes, maybe an hour typing each evening. And all of a sudden, my goal of writing a book that was so out there, so wow, this is outside my comfort zone. It took it from this almost unattainable goal into each day. I had just this simple goal, write for 30 minutes on this idea. It became something that was very easy each day. It became something I looked forward to. What happened is I broke my goal into those actionable steps, the small goals, if you will. Those became the greatest learning pieces of my journey as I went towards success. Hey, teachers. Welcome to the Lead, Serve, Teach podcast, where we explore the intersection of leadership, education, and personal growth. I'm your host, D. Paul Miller, and I'm so glad you're here for another powerful conversation and a little bit of real talk. So let me ask you something. As teachers, as educators, as leaders, how often do you set goals for yourself? Maybe in your classroom, maybe as a school. And how many times have you set goals for yourself and you end up feeling overwhelmed or unsure of how you're going to achieve those very goals that you set? I find myself there as an educator quite often. We're always asked to set goals for ourselves, to set goals of learning for our students. It's so important that we track the progress and growth of our students. And so we're constantly in the zone of setting goals. Sometimes just the idea of how many goals that we have set for us can be overwhelming. I often wonder in this era of the great teacher resignation, the amount of burnout that's happening in the world of education. If part of it is just the sheer amount of goals that we set. Sometimes we can't determine what an important goal is and what's just a goal that's been set by someone else that we picked up along the way. And it's a very, very confusing world sometimes when it comes to goals. But what if the key to success wasn't just setting goals, but setting the right goals? Today, we're going to be diving into the art of goal setting and really how to create goals that are meaningful, actionable, and aligned with your purpose as a teacher and a leader. Let's dive in.
Whenever you bring on a new person, put them through this exercise. If they will not go through this exercise, do not waste a minute of your time with them, because they will never be successful if they won't follow your guidance. Here's the exercise. Take a clean sheet of paper and write down goals in today's date, and then write down 10 goals that you would like to accomplish in the next 12 months. And write them in the present tense. I earn, I achieve, I weigh, I drive such and such a car, I own. And then you take this list of 10, and you say, if I had a magic wand, and I could wave this magic wand, and I could have any one goal on my list within 24 hours, which one goal would have the greatest positive impact on my life? And usually this will jump out at you. Put a circle around that goal. And that's a goal you transfer to a clean sheet of paper, and then you follow the 7 steps. Write it down, set a deadline, make a list of everything you have to do to accomplish it, organize the list into a checklist, take action, and then do something every day. If you'll just do this, nothing can stop you but yourself.
I love Brian Tracy. Great motivational speaker, huge success guru. One of the biggest takeaways that I got from this video is that big results come from taking goals and breaking them down into manageable steps and staying focused on each of those actions that you take each and every day. You know, Brian Tracy shares a great analogy in this video about the power of clarity, really, in how writing down your goals gives you direction and momentum. I think we do a good job of that as teachers. Again, oftentimes we are pushed to make goals for ourselves, make goals for our students. We are, as leaders, we are encouraged to set goals for our schools, for our classrooms and our students. And, you know, I don't think there's a whole lot of problem with writing down the goal. And that's so important to give you, again, that direction where you're aiming. It's kind of like having a GPS for taking a journey as you travel. But when you know exactly where you're going, those turns and stop, they start to make sense as you're heading towards the goal. And as you come across turns maybe that don't make sense, a stop that doesn't make sense, you understand those are things you shouldn't do. And so it helps you keep focused on where you're heading. So writing them down, that's an important part, but it's not the only part. It's not the only place. You don't just write them down and leave them there. And I think that's an important concept that we're going to continue to discuss today as we look at goal setting for us as teachers, as we look at goal setting for our students, for our classrooms. But let's start breaking it down into 3 actionable steps, if you will, some things we can do right now, something tangible you can take and use right now as you're setting goals. Or maybe if you're like most teachers, you already have the goals set, you already have them written down. Let's get into a little bit of how we find success with those goals, how we stay in the zone of progress, how we stay in this mindset of growth versus being in a mindset of overwhelm with our goals, being in a mindset of being burned out by the very goals we set for ourselves. So again, I'll start at the top here. It's setting clear and specific goals is always so important. Instead of saying, I want my students to improve, set a specific goal that kind of has a timeline to it. Brian Tracy mentioned that, for a teacher, they might say, by the end of the semester, I want 80% of my students reading on grade level. So the more specific, the better the goal. Or a different way to look at it is the more specific, setting a timeline, setting a specific measurable piece, the more specific you can be with your goal, research has proven that you will find more success in achieving that goal. And, that kind of goes against a little bit of like the normal thinking in your brain. You go, man, the more specific I am, it's like the more responsibility you feel you have to take, the more accountability there is. And so a lot of times human nature will push us away from that and say, man, maybe not. I'd rather keep it a little more nebulous, like I want my students to improve. The more specific the goal, yes, there is more accountability that comes along with that, but that's exactly what we need to make sure that we stay focused. The next thing Brian Tracy talked about was taking your goals and breaking them into steps, actionable steps. For example, if you want to increase classroom engagement, start by planning an interactive activity at least once per week. If you're not comfortable doing them or you haven't done them in the past and it's something you're wanting to do, don't set a goal of doing this every day and overwhelm yourself with your own goal. Break it into steps. Start with 1 day a week. I'm going to implement a Kagan strategy. I'm going to implement a collaborative learning opportunity for my students, and I'm going to plan it out ahead of time so that you know what's happening. It's one time, and then you can take the feedback, just like last week's episode. You can take the feedback from that and use it to become better. Brian Tracy's advice of taking one small goal at a time, well, it applies perfectly in the classroom. It applies perfectly to our world. I know Brian Tracy is somebody linked and connected with success in the business world, but so much of what he says applies directly to us as teachers. It applies to us as classroom managers, as leaders in the classroom, as the educators. And each step we take to build confidence in ourselves and in our process and in our best practices, it brings us closer to that finish line. It brings us closer to student success, which is our driving purpose. The third thing that Brian Tracy also talks about is tracking progress. And for me, that also means celebrating growth. And, you can use simple tools in the classroom like a chart where you track progress. It could be personal journals that your students keep to track their progress. Don't forget to celebrate those small victories along the way. Celebrate the growth. Celebrate those moments where you're getting feedback, where you're becoming better. It's not always about that end goal. We don't want to really celebrate that end goal as much as we celebrate the growth that happens in the journey along the way. Let me share a quick story from my journey. In 2017, I became the principal of a small virtual school in my school district. Things were moving along swimmingly until 2020. And yes, you know what I'm talking about. 2020, the onset of COVID changed everything, but it really changed things for me as an educator and for me as a principal of a virtual school. I went from around 300 students to well over 10,000 students. And in that moment, I got caught up in the day-to-day activities. I got caught up in being the manager of that school and kind of stepped away from being the educator. People were patting me on the back saying, man, great job, Paul. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you're running this virtual school. Wow, we're able to keep education going even in the midst of COVID. We're able to keep learning happening for our students. Great job, great job. And yet in that moment, when I should have been at the pinnacle of my career, I felt the lowest of my whole career. I felt the lowest in that moment. It inspired me as I made my comeback, as I took the failure that was happening and I learned from the feedback and I started to set new goals to step back in as that educator, as the educational leader that I needed to be for my school district. In those moments, I started to realize there's maybe a philosophy that's developing here that I decided I wanted to share with the world. And of course, I started trying to determine, how am I going to share this idea, my story, my blueprint for being a successful educator? How am I going to share this with the world? Of course, and asking some friends and family what they thought I should do, everyone kept coming back to this idea, well, Paul, you should write a book. As I started to write it, I kind of got in this mindset of, okay, I don't know what I'm doing, so I need to go and start finding some people who have written books before. How did they publish their book? How did they make a difference with their story? Because that, at the end of the day, was my heart. I wanted to make a difference with my story in this world of education. And so that's where the birth of the book, Hey Teachers Don't Quit, came from. It's where the idea, the lead, serve, teach philosophy came from. And in this book, as I started to write, I was so excited. I was taking in all this information from individuals who had written books before. And the funny thing was, is so many of those individuals were morning people. They talked so much about getting up first thing in the morning. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to start getting up each morning and I'm just going to write. I'm going to write this book out. I'm going to have it written out in no time. And I remember getting up in the morning, first thing in the morning, and I'm trying to write. And I remember it kind of messed up my routines, messed up some of my morning habits. And the more I tried to set goals for myself to get writing done in the morning, the more out of sync I felt, the more out of whack I felt each and every day. And I remember hearing one writer, he was talking about how he tried to go through and do the same thing. He tried to get up every morning like all of his counterparts were doing, writing in the morning and before anybody was awake and having such great focus time. And, he said that he was trying to do that, and he just admitted it straight up. He said, I just wasn't a morning person. Didn't like getting up in the morning, and I was trying to force myself to do it. And he said he found himself hating this idea of writing all of a sudden. He said, this isn't right. This doesn't align with my purpose, my values, and my goals. So he had to step back, and he said, you know what? He's like, I have my morning routine already laid out. I love my morning routine, and I don't want to change it up for the sake of writing. I need to figure out something else. Obviously, he worked during the day. Funny enough, he was actually a teacher, and he would go teach during the day. He had a wife and family, and so in the afternoons, he wanted to spend time with them. Really, he started looking at his schedule, and he said, the time I have is actually late in the evening, like between 11 and 12, maybe 10 to 11. Everybody's gone to sleep. And he decided he could go down to his basement and type away on his typewriter. So this individual, when I heard him tell that story of how he started to write, and he set small goals for himself to write just a little bit every day, that really helped me. I've also listened to Brian Tracy enough to start thinking about this idea that I needed a goal to write that was attainable. It was specific. Okay, by the end of this week, I'm going to have this chapter written. By the end of this month, I'm going to have this portion of the book completed. And so I started writing it down with dates and specific ideas, specific word counts. And slowly over time, I started to build a map, really. It became this diagram, this map of the book that had timelines on it. And all of a sudden, when I would go in, and again, I decided I would not give up my morning routine to write. I would, in fact, change my nightly routine and would type, focus on spending at least 30, 45 minutes, maybe an hour typing each evening. So, wow, this is outside my comfort zone. Wow, this is something I've never done before. Wow, I don't even know where to start. It took it from this almost unattainable goal into each day. I had just this simple goal, write for 30 minutes on this idea. Write for another 30 minutes and share a story from your experience, and then wrap it up into this lead, serve, teach philosophy. It became something that was very easy each day. It became something I look forward to each day, writing this simple little statements, these simple elements to my book and putting them into this roadmap, this design that I'd built through writing down my goals. So it was amazing how it went from this big, unattainable thing into something that daily became easy. Daily became goals that were achievable, that were very specific. And it took this whole process and broke it into steps that allowed me to write this book, Hey Teachers, Don't Quit, and become a best-selling author with it. And, it's funny, as we've been speaking about Brian Tracy today, Brian Tracy is one of the people that actually gave a testimonial for my book and is written in the front of my book. And I'm very proud of that, and I celebrate that. I celebrate the win of the book. But what I found was more important was actually what happened along the way. What happened is I broke my goal into those actionable steps, the small goals, if you will. Those became the greatest learning pieces of my journey as I went towards success. Brian Tracy, he often says that success is goals. All else is commentary. That statement, it sticks with me because it reminds me that the goals that we set, it gives our effort purpose. Make sure you heard that correctly. Success is goals. All else is commentary. It reminds us that goals give our efforts purpose. Without them, it's easy to get lost in the noise and distractions. So what's one goal that you've set for yourself and your students? Think about how breaking it into steps might help you reach your goal faster with a lot less stress. And that's the big takeaway for today. Goal setting, it's a lot more than just writing them down. It's a lot more than just writing down our dreams. It's about creating a clear, actionable path to achieve them. It's about figuring out how to achieve those goals, the right goals, with happiness, with joy, with the ability to celebrate our efforts and to achieve those purposes. Whether you're in a classroom or career, whether you're looking at your life, purposeful goals can lead to extraordinary results. So before we wrap up, I want to hear from you. What's one goal that you've set for yourself as a teacher, or maybe in your life, that led to some great results, that led to a great outcome? And maybe even more importantly, what did you learn along the way about setting goals? What did you learn along the way that was so valuable? Share it in the comments below. Let's motivate one another to stay on track with our goals, because together we can turn our goals into reality. Until next time, remember, you're not just a teacher, you're a change maker. So keep striving, keep inspiring, and don't quit. I'm D. Paul Miller. I'll see you for the next episode.